Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Juneteenth celebration. My name is Herb Gainey. I am the Executive Director of the Student Union. And on behalf of the Student Union, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone. As we gather here together this morning, we invite you to reflect on the meaning of Juneteenth. Was it just a day in history over 150 years ago, or is there a deeper meaning? We believe that recent events have clearly shown that what freedom means is a very relevant question even today in 2020. We've seen the African American community denied what we would consider basic freedoms. So as we go through today's discussion and reflect upon the meaning of Juneteenth, we invite you to ask yourself, what does freedom mean to me? What impact does Juneteenth have on me personally? And where do we go from here as a society? To help guide us through that process, Miss Grace Anakoko will serve as our host. Grace is a senior public health major here at UTSA, and she works also in the programs area here at the Student Union. Grace, you have our attention.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Gainey, for those introductory remarks. Welcome to our Juneteenth celebration. My name is Grace, and it's a pleasure to have y'all here with us. It's the Student Union's fourth year hosting this event, and each year we collaborate with the Multicultural Student Center for Equity and Justice and the UTSA African American Studies program. Thank you all for joining us today. Even though we aren't able to celebrate this event in person, this virtual event is a chance for us to come together as a community and reflect on what freedom and liberation mean to us. I want to recognize the many talented people who have generously given their time and energy in order to participate in this community event. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few housekeeping items with you all. First, throughout the duration of this program, you'll be able to interact, comment, and ask questions using the chat feature. Although there is a limit on the number of people who can attend this virtual event on Zoom, we're also live streaming the event on our Student Union YouTube page. Those who join after the event has reached capacity will be automatically redirected to the Student Union YouTube page. If you're watching on YouTube Live, you are also able to interact with us through the chat feature. We have staff monitoring both chats and we'll do our best in keeping up and addressing all comments and questions asked. There will also be a time for questions after the panel discussion. Now, to begin our program, I would like to introduce UTSA Professor Carla Broadus. Professor Broadus is the project coordinator for the African American Students Program and senior lecturer with the Race, Ethnicity, Gender, Sexuality Studies Department of the College of Education Development. She teaches undergraduate education majors, children literature, reading assessment, African American studies, and reading development at the university. In addition, she's the faculty advisor for the American Tau chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, and chairperson for both the UTSA MLK Junior Parade and UTSA MLK Junior Day Committee. Welcome, Professor Broadus.
Good morning to all, and let me welcome you as well to our Juneteenth celebration. It is a pleasure to have you here because I want to tell you a little bit about what Juneteenth is and then let you enjoy the many guest speakers that we have. In 1866, Juneteenth celebration began. Why? Well, prior to then, the Emancipation Proclamation was written. It was issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1st, 1963. And he decided that the enslaved people in the Confederate States in rebellion against the Union shall be free. Therefore, people would not be sold any longer, such as you see Jane, age 24, a very superior slave that was going to be sold. Mary, age 24 years with one child. After the war between the states came to a close in the spring of 1865, General Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas that June and signaled that the 250,000 slaves would be emancipated. But note, although the emancipation didn't happen overnight for everyone, in some cases, some of the slaves, that information was still withheld from them after the 19th, just because the harvest season had not been completed and the slave owners wanted to make sure that their crops were harvested. The large celebrations began with the first Juneteenth anniversary celebration noted in 1866. These celebrations occur all across the region, honoring this important day for the former slaves. There are a lot of particulars about Juneteenth that our panelists are going to provide you. And I think that that's going to be an awesome educational experience for all of you. Grace?
Thank you, Professor Broadus, for your remarks. You continue to impact UTSA in a big way with your dedication and all your knowledge. Even though the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, an estimated 250,000 people were still enslaved in Texas for an additional 2.5 years, until Major General Granger landed in Galveston on June 19, 1865, with an order that all those who were enslaved were free. I would now like to introduce Alexandria O'Neill. Alexandria is a graduate assistant in the African American Studies programs at UTSA. She is also currently a master's student in the sociology department and will be graduating this fall. She will be reading the General Order number 3.
Good morning, everyone. With the General Order number 3, it was read by General Gordon Granger on the 19th of June, 1865 in Galveston, Texas. The people are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This includes an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them become that between employer and hired labor. The freed are advised to remain at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere.
Thank you for that, Alexandra. We definitely never want to forget what this day meant to so many and how joyous they must have been. Next, we have a special video message. We asked members of the UTSA community to share what Juneteenth and liberation mean to them. If anyone experiences any audio or video difficulties, we're posting a link to the video in the chat so you can watch it on demand. Here is our community message.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh,
the meaning of Juneteenth and liberation is that we must listen to one another and disrupt all acts of discrimination and supremacy for an inclusive justice.
And go home to my Lord.
Juneteenth is really the beginning of like African Americans being free, freedom of slavery, and like freedom of speech for a lot of people of color, but mostly African Americans, and I believe power to the people.
My name is Brandy Scott, and I'm the director of the Multicultural Student Center for Equity and Justice. And what Juneteenth means to me is celebrating Black lives and fighting every day against racism and for racial justice.
My name is Priscilla Collier, and to me, Juneteenth is a celebration of those who came before us and how hard they worked for us to be able to live in this country as we do today and to build on their legacy.
Juneteenth used to be a complicated holiday for me. Growing up in Houston, it was great because I was celebrating with my family. But as I grew older and was able to reflect more about the origins of Juneteenth, it became more uncomfortable to celebrate the fact that enslaved people in Texas were unaware that they were free almost 3 years after everyone else. However, I changed my mind about that and decided to use Juneteenth as a way to honor the lives of enslaved people in Texas and the fact that they knew about their freedom. And that is what Juneteenth means to me.
Justice and change continues. That's what hundreds of protesters say motivated them to march in downtown San Antonio.
The 19th Stephen Cavazos with the pain they say needs to be felt.
Juneteenth and liberation to me means a continued hope that things are going to get better.
But I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out.
To me, Juneteenth is a reminder of all the work that still needs to be done, all the work that I still need to do.
Juneteenth means the first step to move forward.
Juneteenth and liberation to me means progression towards a better future.
Our liberation is bound to get it.
And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day.
I believe that liberation is a human right, a cause for celebration, and something we should all fight for.
And I do it 1,000 times again.
Juneteenth to me means commemorating freedom and diversifying community.
And for that we have each other. And we will rise, we will rise, we will rise. We'll rise.
What Juneteenth and liberation mean to me is respecting people's freedom. In times like this today, we need to continue to fight for equality and justice in order to align with our highest ideals.
I will rise 1,000 times again.
Juneteenth to me means fighting for freedom for everyone.
I like the waves will rise up in spite of the ache. We'll rise up and we'll do it 1,000 times again.
Juneteenth is supposed to be a symbol of freedom from oppression and liberation. Although liberation and justice go hand in hand. Without one, you can't have the other.
Thank you to all the faculty, staff, and students who contributed their message to this powerful video. And also a special thank you to Niana Pallet, a UTSA graduate assistant in the Student Union, for all the time and energy she spent making this video. The message was meaningful and inspirational. As we move on in our program, get ready for even more powerful words. Christopher Michael has been rocking Texas mics for 20 years, former president of Poetry Slam Incorporated, a Texas Poet Laureate nominee, and National Poetry Slam Finalist. Christopher Michael has shared stages with Angie Stone and Eric Bennett. He's the founder of 310 Brown Street Publishing, author of 3 books, and Slam Master for Austin Neo Soul. You can check out his work through the links posted in the chat.
Hooty-hoo! Happy Jubilee Day, everyone. I bring to you words of pain, tragedy, excellence, and hope. George Floyd, the usual suspect, killed for maybe a fake dollar or check. Proof life is not what they respect. Who's next to get a knee in the neck? Black ball player, blackballed for taking a knee. Black man dies when cop takes a knee. I can't breathe, mama. I don't want to be another hashtag or halo. How can one soar to success when they clip the wings of James Birds with Jasper City Dragons? We can't even go jogging without buckshots in our bellies. They made a meal of Tamir rice seasoned with hashtags and halos sprinkled with bullets, smothered in sauteed bloody bodies over BB guns in the park, like the ones Rekia Boyd caught, and the only probable cause is systemic racism. A new video every week. When they can't pull us out the car in the streets, they deliver hashtags and halos to our couch. No knock means no right to fight back, even when they get the wrong house. Black women aren't safe behind closed doors, not when the bullet has a name on it that looks like yours, Brianna. Tailor-made excuses for every murder. She looked suspicious. She fit the description. She was resistant. We sweeten salty tears with Sandra Bland hashtags, another tragedy to follow, another suspicious death to swallow. It's like they're hungry for more hashtags and halos. King brought us peace and they killed him. Our people pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and they bombed them. We built our own churches and they burned them. They don't see color and we don't see justice. They riot when their team wins. We riot when they slaughter kin. How can you compare that? We don't want the flame to catch, but we be barrel of black powder and they be lit match. We believe in peace. We don't want to see our cities burn, but we have a right to defend ourselves. We run out of cheeks to turn. No more hashtags, no more halo. Now I bring to you excellence and hope. If we can hear the sound of the ocean in a seashell, then can we hear the sound of the ghetto in a Coke can? From the ocean, do we hear the cries of a people ghosted into nothing, choosing the waters of triangular trade over being traded on the auction block? From the ghetto, do we then hear the moans of a people left behind with empty hands, annihilated identity, castrated culture, severed tongues, fighting for a rung or a bootstrap just to pull themselves up by? No, there is no ocean in seashell, but it does resonate an ensemble of ambient air, a discarded thing, pulling in the vibrations of a world around it, giving the ear something to dance to, the mind something to think about. Thought becomes desire turned action, creation, brushstroke becomes painted picture, then pen on page, then poem. We are a people, powerful enough to turn nothing into something. We make a way out of no way. We nurture nations with empty pantries. We big mama magic the scraps into fine cuisine, then food for the soul. They love how we translate our frequency. It's so jazzy how we rock. We made our blues a sellable sound. We wrap the king's tongue around our drum now. Everyone wants to be hip. We can orchestra it, orient to opposites, from ambient noise and symphony to silence into universes. We be the true image of God, creating life from non-existence with just the sound of a voice. And when our children are morphed into martyrs, we turn tragedy into triumph, poverty into prosperity, victims into victors. We don't appropriate, we create. We take the least and make it the most and convince the rest of the world it is worth having. We swim upstream. We do it with so much suave and swagger that the bear wants to be salmon too. Bought our bodies, commodified our culture, gentrified the sounds we found in the Coke can, took. You are people, powerful enough to turn nothing into something, create something out of nothing. Then nothing becomes the only thing you can't do. Hooty hoo, my name is Christopher Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Michael, for those wonderful words. It's really inspiring to hear you so poetically articulate what many of us are feeling during this time. You are truly amazing. Now we will transition to the panel portion of our event. I will pass the mic over to Professor Broadus, who will be moderating the panel discussion. As we mentioned earlier, please feel free to interact with our panelists using the chat feature on Zoom or YouTube Live. We'd love to hear from you.
Thank you, Grace. Let me first introduce our dynamic panel to you. First, we have Dr. Charles Gentry. Dr. Gentry is a versatile educator and consultant of local artists, community organizations, and small businesses. Many of you that have taken classes in African American Studies have had the opportunity to enjoy Dr. Gentry's classes. He has taught at the high school level, the college level, cultural and computer application courses. He's been a curator, theater manager at the Flint Institute of Arts in Michigan. He is a San Antonio native. He is a UTSA graduate. Dr. Gentry enjoys being involved in as a certified tourist ambassador, a World Heritage ambassador, a high school lacrosse coach, and as a community volunteer. Welcome, Dr. Gentry. Priscilla Okolie, she is one of our top UTSA students. I have to tell you, I have toured with Priscilla during a social justice tour. I've sat in meetings with Priscilla. Priscilla's awesome. She's a 20-year-old junior at UTSA. She's a public health with a double minor in African American studies and politics and law. She plans to attend law school post-graduation and work as an attorney in the state of Texas. She is also the president of our very own UTSA Black Student Union. Kudos for Priscilla. We are being blessed to have the Honorable Stephanie Boyd, the presiding judge of the 187th Judicial District Court, a felony district court. She's an associate professor of our very own University of Texas at San Antonio, and a member of the Order of Baristas, a former member of the Inns of Court, a former president of the San Antonio Black Lawyers Association, and a former member of the Pi Sigma Alpha Political Honor Society. We welcome the Honorable Judge Boyd. We also are welcoming Mr. Byron Miller. Byron Miller is a fifth generation of San Antonian and was awarded the Martin Luther King Jr. Distinguished Achievement Award. He is one of the outstanding individuals that comes off of our east side of San Antonio. He's been appointed to numerous boards and commissions by the Texas governors and by the San Antonio mayors and by council members. He's a longtime businessman and CEO of the Miller Child Development Center, and he is our commissioner of the San Antonio Juneteenth Celebration. So thank you all of our panelists. And if I can get you all to now, please display your lovely faces so that our audience can begin to enjoy you. I want to start off by asking a question to each of you that I think will help start the discussion. And I'm asking you this for a couple of reasons, and I should be honest with you. I just recently got the opportunity to review for myself the broadest slave location here in Texas, which is in Marlin, Texas. And the broadest family was owned by a gentleman by the name of Churchill Jones. So that in itself has gotten me, and having gone to our celebrations, it made me want to ask you all, if you could rename this day, what would it be and why? Priscilla, let me ask you first. If you could rename this day, what would you name it?
I would rename it Jubilee Day.
because I learned from a few of the panelists that this was one of the original names of this day. And I think that it allows us to remember that through all the trials and tribulations that enslaved Black people had in this country, they still found joy. They still found hope to push forward and to fight for greater than what they were given. And I think that the name of Jubilee harkens back to that.
Thank you. Mr. Byron Miller,
Yes.
what would you name this day if you had the option of renaming it, and why?
Well, I do want to say this, because when we say Juneteenth, Juneteenth is actually a nickname. We always, as proud African Americans, refer to it as the 19th of June. But I would rename it Conflict Resolution Day, Unity Day. And the reason why I'm saying that is because we have to raise the level of consciousness within this community. And with all the issues that are going on, when you think about the Civil War and what conflict it was, and all the conflicts that have occurred since then, wouldn't this be a great city that when conflicts occurred, we had a conflict resolution center that would allow people to come and have discussions here in San Antonio. And with Juneteenth as the background, it's the 19th of June being the undergirth of it.
Thank you. Dr. Gentry, what would you rename it?
I would second both of those suggestions, actually. I can appreciate the historical significance of the early celebrations of the 19th of June, beginning in 1866, being a Jubilee celebration. Many people may be familiar with that term being associated with spiritual singers like the Fifth Jubilee Singers out of the HBCU in Nashville. And, this idea of jubilation and celebration does go back to that original day. But, given the history since 1865, I believe Mr. Miller definitely has an important point to say. We should celebrate, but then also look to resolve conflicts that are still affecting us in the current day.
Judge Boyd, what would your answer be?
Well, that is, I've been thinking about that. And I think that hopefully a name would encapsulate the struggle, the continued struggle, but the knowledge that the slaves were freed. And what I've come up with is June Remembrance Day. Because if you say June Remembrance Day, I think that would make people say, what is June Remembrance Day? That sounds like that is something extremely important. Let me research it. So that is what I think it would be. That title signifies to remember the past, but still know that there's more work to be done.
Thank you. My next question, and all of you had some really outstanding answers. Comanche Crossing is noted for having the largest and the most famous Juneteenth celebration. Why do you feel this area of Texas is where it happened? Mr. Miller, would you like to begin answering that question?
Absolutely. The first celebration was in Galveston, obviously, when those folks that heard the reading of General Order Number 3. But each year thereafter, as it spread around the state of Texas, folks don't realize San Antonio is the second largest city in Texas. And so we had major celebrations here in San Antonio. However, I think as Comanche Crossing and other rural areas started having major celebrations and the urban areas it fell off, it had a lot to do with how we in urban areas, or the folks then at that time, started viewing the 19th of June as going backwards, and that it was something that may not be as important as the 4th of July. And so, Frederick Douglass in a speech in New York he talked about the 4th of July and Independence Day and what did it mean to people of African descent. At that time, we weren't even citizens of America. And so I think people in urban or rural areas, they have time to reflect more so than other urban areas. And I think they caught more grief to a certain extent, and they knew what the sufferings and suffrage was. And so as a result, they really embraced it more than in urban areas.
Thank you. Priscilla, do you have any ideas as to why you think the Comanche, at the area known as Comanche Crossing, has one of the largest and most famous Juneteenth celebrations?
Honestly, I had to do a little bit of research on this question, and when I did, I came upon the consensus that when you look at the relationship between Native Americans and enslaved people or people of enslaved descent, there has been you can draw certain correlations between the two. And I think in that area, as Mr. Byron Miller expressed, there was a need, or there was a reason as to why they were able to celebrate, because a lot of the times when we're pushed to marginalized recesses of society, we have to find our way to express ourselves. And that was just one of the available areas to do so.
Thank you, Priscilla. Judge Boyd.
Yes, I think it's the same reason, at least one of the reasons, is the same reason why San Antonio has one of the largest Martin Luther King marches. You have to look at the people who organized, the people who put in the hard work to purchase the property to have that Juneteenth celebration there, and the people who actually organized. And when you look at Martin Luther King March here in San Antonio, there's a lot of organization, there's a lot of publicity. And with Juneteenth, it's only recently, this year with everything that's going on, that it's come to the forefront of the mind of many of our young people. And it's brought back memories to many of the people in our elderly community and our senior citizens. So I think you have to look at the people who actually organized it and the people who actually did the hard work to make it a celebration and to make it be something that everybody wanted to be a part of and everybody wanted to have it recognized.
Thank you. And Dr. Gentry, why do you think Comanche Crossing is noted for having the largest and most famous Juneteenth celebration?
I would have to say this is probably my favorite question that you ask, and it's for a reason that I didn't expect to find. I was familiar with Comanche Crossing having a large Juneteenth celebration based on the Texas State Historical website on their description of Juneteenth, and I'm teaching about that in my class this term. I teach about it, in most of my classes, and to dig a little bit deeper, I realize it's in Limestone County, and there's not very many famous Black people from Limestone County. Probably the most famous people are Bob Wills and Anna Nicole Smith, and the largest city in Limestone County is Mejia. And, I believe Mr. Miller is onto something in saying that this was a central location that people from other parts of East Texas and Central Texas could congregate. There's a location there. It's known as Comanche Crossing popularly, but the official name is Booker T. Washington Park. So it's named after the great Wizard of Tuskegee, the former leader of the Tuskegee Institute. But I think that name, the popular name Comanche Crossing, still holds resonance because of what Priscilla mentioned, in that it was the site of a massacre at Fort Parker, back in during the Indian Wars. And a lot of white people were massacred and or taken hostage. And the last Comanche chief was actually Quanah Parker, was the product of one of the women who was captured. But I'll wrap it up by saying the most important thing about Comanche Crossing and the city of Mejia that we should remember right now, today, and in this year is that on June 19th, 1981, there were 3 young Black men who drowned in a boat after they were arrested by 3 officers at a Juneteenth celebration. And they were arrested for marijuana possession. And in apprehending them, they attempted to ferry them across Lake Mejia, to take them to jail. But the boat, it was a small aluminum fishing boat, and it was overloaded beyond capacity. And in violation of the rules of procedure, these young men were handcuffed. And so when the boat capsized, those 3 Black men drowned, and the 3 officers survived. They were brought up on charges of criminal negligence for those deaths. And after the trial was moved 3 different times, they were acquitted by an all-white jury in Dallas. And so this is something that, we should remember those names. And I'm going to say their names right now so that we can remember them going forward. That's Carl Baker, he was 19 years old, Stephen Booker, who was also 19, and Anthony Freeman, who was 18 years old. So I think we should say their names from here on out.
Thank you. Now I want to ask you all to go back and think about why President Lincoln wanted and had the desire to save the Union during the Civil War, and what role slavery played in this effort. Because we have Juneteenth after the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, but what role did slavery play in the desire to save the Union? Mr. Miller, can I ask you?
Absolutely. That's a very interesting question from the standpoint of history. And a number of years ago in 2003, we actually had the actual proclamation here in San Antonio at the Whitty Museum. At that time, I had Lerone Bennett, my fellow Morehouse brother, class of 49, I'm class of 79. He was the speaker. And Lerone Bennett was the publisher of Ebony and Jet magazine. Well, at that time, he had written a book called Forced into Glory. And it's a story about Abraham Lincoln. Many of you all probably don't realize Abraham Lincoln initially said that he would have slavery if it could ensure the Union would not split. And so his issue was not slavery over the Union, it was the Union over slavery. Now, with that said, as Lerone Bennett has said, he was forced into glory. So his whole attitude towards slavery and everything else morphed, it changed. Why do you think, if you ever read, I wish people would really read the Emancipation Proclamation. It doesn't free everybody. It only frees the slaves in the South that had already seceded from the Union. And they just wanted the slaves to fight with the Union and not fight with the South. And so the reason why he didn't free the slaves in the North was because he didn't want the Union Army to be, those fighting, to be thinking they're fighting about slavery. That's what the whole Civil War was about. The South had an agrarian society, and it did many things that helped build the Northern industrial society. But the reality is, Abraham Lincoln was forced into glory. Is he a great president? Absolutely. Is the Emancipation Proclamation a great document? Absolutely. But none of it is what we really think it is. And we really need to understand, and that's why during this time, when I talk about raising the level of consciousness, these are the things we ought to be talking about so we don't continue to perpetuate these myths and or falsities to our younger generations.
Thank you. Priscilla, would you like to answer that for me? Why do you think President Lincoln was noted for his desire to save the Union during the Civil War?
when I look at this question, the pessimist in me jumps out, and I lean more towards the side of Lincoln recognized that there were bodies in the South that would be beneficial to his agenda of protecting the stronghold that was the Union. So he appealed to a point that would entice them to fight on their side. And I think when it comes to the Union and the efforts made to keep the country together, what happens afterwards is slavery technically didn't really end. It just transformed. It took on a new name. It took on a new body in the form of how we police Black bodies in this country. But that's a different tangent. When it comes to the way that Lincoln thought of these people, I do think that potentially he was on the side of morality, but he recognized that there was a beneficial aspect to appealing to Black people in the South and promising them a different way of life if they were to fight for his cause.
Judge Boyd?
Yes, I'm rereading your question. And when I read the question about the desire to save the Union during the Civil War, what role did slavery play in this effort? Well, of course, we know President Lincoln was doing all he could to save the Union. And if you look at history, the whole reason, well, not the whole reason, but part of the reason for the Emancipation Proclamation is he needed more troops. And more troops were slaves. And if you look at the history, then everyone is concerned with slaves having weapons. But when you look at Abraham Lincoln, you have to ask yourself, even though there may be different reasons for why he freed the slaves and what he was looking at as far as more troops, saving the Union, not wanting to be the president who said, the United States does not exist, I let it fall. You have to look at, do we just look at his actions? Does it really matter the reason behind his actions for doing the emancipation? Or do we say we look at his reasons as well as the results of his actions? But I believe all the history books will tell you that the majority reason for the emancipation was more troops were needed because the North was losing the war.
And thank you very much, Judge Boyd. I'm looking at our time and I'm thinking, because we have to also have it open for questions. I want to ask Dr. Gentry a different question, just so that we can get an idea. Considering the current protest, what impact will the Juneteenth celebrations have on Americans this year?
Good choice to skip me on the Lincoln question, by the way, because that's probably the most complicated question and will lead to all kinds of debates about the Civil War. I do have an answer for that, but in terms of the meaning of Juneteenth this year, probably many of you woke up this morning, if you turned on the radio or the TV to watch the news, then you're seeing more discussion of Juneteenth than ever before. And it has very much to do with the uprisings that we're seeing in our streets over these past few weeks in the aftermath of the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and now Rayshard Brooks. And, you know, I could go on and on and on. And so I think this is a watershed moment for us. And, you know, let's set aside the question of whether or not, you know, the President of the United States, you know, should have scheduled a political rally on this day in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the site of one of this nation's largest racially motivated massacres on Black Wall Street in the Greenwood district, where there will be a Juneteenth celebration today. and he switched his rally till tomorrow, where there probably will be protests. So I think this will be a watershed moment with all of the political and social unrest that we're experiencing at this moment. But there's also a pandemic that's still underway across this country, and Black people, Black and brown people, minority communities, impoverished communities, people who were vulnerable even before the pandemic began, are getting more sick and are dying in disproportionate numbers. And so I think that's going to impact the turnout for some of these events. Mr. Miller has had to postpone the San Antonio Juneteenth celebration because of the restrictions, and our own city's spike of coronavirus cases. And so I think there's going to be a mixed celebration this year, but I believe in years moving forward, this will be important. And it's an official holiday in the state of Texas, and in most of the other states. There's only 3 states in which it's not an official holiday yet. That's the North and South Dakota and Alaska. Senator John Cornyn is now proposing to make it a national holiday. He's riding Sheila Jackson Lee's coattails, because she's been after that for decades now. And so I think we could see a national holiday come out of this, and a much bigger celebration moving forward.
Thank you. I need to ask if there are any questions that are out there in our viewing area. Do you think the 13th Amendment should be ratified before real criminal justice reform can take place? That's a question that we have. And one of you wanting to answer that question? Okay, Mr. Miller. We can't hear you, Mr. Miller. You don't have your...
First of all, the 13th Amendment has been ratified. And when we talk about the Emancipation Proclamation, it was an executive order. And so the Emancipation Proclamation didn't come into effect until December of 1865. I wish everyone would read, though, the 13th Amendment. Not only did it abolish slavery, it also set up mass incarceration. Because what it did was it talked about, when you read General Order Number 3, and it talked about being idle. But now all of a sudden, Blacks were being arrested for just loitering, standing around, standing on a corner. It was very little then that would allow the law enforcement to arrest you. And what that meant was, in the 13th Amendment, it says slavery is abolished except if you are incarcerated. So now the reason why we have mass incarceration and Jim Crow kicked in, it has everything to do with the fact that we are still, as I believe it was stated earlier, slavery just kind of morphed into a different realm. And the 13th Amendment, it is ratified, but it really needs to be expanded upon, and we really need to change the verbiage of that from the standpoint of the loss of rights that people have when in prison.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. I need to thank all of you for being such fantastic panelists, because we could have long conversations about this, and I need to turn it back over to Grace.
Thank you, Professor Broadus, for leading us through such a thoughtful and meaningful panel discussion. This brings us to the conclusion of our Juneteenth celebration. During this time, it is especially important for us to celebrate and reflect on liberation as we continue to strive for racial justice and the abolishment of racial violence in this country. Thank you to all the panelists who joined us today. You have provided us with an incredible discussion and many things to think about. Now more than ever, it is extremely important to talk and listen to each other in an effort to build community and connection. We want to thank Professor Broadus, the UTSA African American Studies Program, and the UTSA Multicultural Student Center for Equity and Justice for being here with us today. I want to thank our Dean of Students, L.T. Robinson, Executive Director of the Student Union, Herb Gainey, for their continued support of the annual Juneteenth event and all Student Union programs and initiatives. Thank you to our guest speakers, Christopher Michael and Alexandria O'Neill. And last but not least, thank you to everyone who has taken the time to join us here today. The Student Union is excited to continue offering programs and initiatives such as events, a food pantry, retail location, as well as meeting and study rooms to the UTSA student body. This event was recorded, so please feel free to contact us for more information. The link to that will be listed in the chat box. We hope everyone has a safe day and enjoys the rest of your Juneteenth. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Happy Juneteenth, everyone.
Thank you.